The sun was sinking low over the horizon, casting a burnt orange glow across the endless plains. Dust swirled lazily around the old wooden sign at the edge of the property. "Welcome to Dry Gulch." The letters were faded, the woods splintered and weathered by decades of wind and sun. Most folks would have ridden past without a second thought, thinking it just another ghost town swallowed by time. But not Silas Boone. He had a keen eye for forgotten places, the sort that whispered promise to a man willing to listen. Silas was no stranger to risk. A rugged man in his early 40s, with hands calloused from years of tending cattle and fixing fences. He had a face carved from the same stone that dotted the mesas around him. Sharp blue eyes missed nothing, scanning the horizon as if expecting the land itself to answer him. When he saw the auction notice for Dry Gulch, the price had been almost laughable, $100. Most folks scoffed. $100 for a town that no longer had a sheriff, a general store, or a single soul living in sight. But Silas knew better. Every old place had a story, and he had a feeling this one's story wasn't finished yet. The journey to Dry Gulch had taken him through a maze of dusty roads, where tumbleweeds danced like ghosts and crows circled overhead, cawing warnings he didn't understand, but felt deep in his chest. As he approached the town, the creaking of abandoned windmills and the whistle of the wind through broken windows gave the place an eerie, almost mournful rhythm. His horse, a sturdy black stallion named Thunder, snorted nervously. Silas patted its neck. He was used to fear. Fear was what kept a man alive out here. Every building in Dry Gulch bore the scars of neglect. The general store leaned slightly to one side, the sign above the door barely hanging on by rusted nails. The saloon's swinging doors rattled even without a soul pushing them. The chapel steeple had long since lost its cross, and a collapsed roof gave a view of the sky above. Silas could imagine the town in its prime, miners with pickaxes and gold in their pockets, cowboys laughing after long days on the range, children chasing each other down the dusty streets. That Dry Gulch had once been alive was clear in the shadows that lingered in the corners of the broken windows. He dismounted and walked through the empty main street, the soles of his boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. There was a quiet so profound it pressed against his ears, the kind of silence that made a man feel small and watched at the same time. He found the town well within his expectations, desolate, abandoned, forgotten, but also strange. Something about the place felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to awaken it. As he approached the old hotel, Silas noticed movement from the corner of his eye. A shutter rattled, then something heavier, a shadow maybe brushing past a window. His hand went to the revolver at his hip, a habit formed over years of living where danger could be a coyote, a stranger, or worse. But when he stepped closer, he saw not the empty windows he expected, but a faint light flickering behind the tattered curtains. A slow, cautious knock at the hotel door startled him, then it opened. A woman stood there, her eyes wide and wary. She was older than he expected, with sharp features and hair streaked silver like the moonlight on the plains. Her name was revealed quickly: Marlene Cade. She had a presence that made a man hesitate, as if the room itself had shifted around her. You bought this place?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something sharper, almost defensive. Silas nodded, unsure what to make of her reaction. "I did. Seemed a bargain, that's all." He tried to smile, but it felt thin under the weight of the way she was watching him. "You've got $100? You've got more guts than sense," she said. There was a strange edge to her words, one that made Silas feel like an intruder and a guest at the same time. Then, just as he was about to ask more, other figures emerged from the shadows. A man broad-shouldered and silent, followed by a younger girl with fierce eyes, her hair wild from running through the dry wind. A boy peeked from behind a doorway, his gaze cautious but unafraid. Silas counted there were 6 of them, all seemingly ordinary, yet carrying a weight he couldn't name. "This is our home," Marlene said, her voice now firmer, almost like a warning. "We've been here a long time. You weren't meant to find us." Silas's mind raced. He had expected ghosts, maybe old animals still surviving in the ruins, or even the echo of a town forgotten. He had not expected a living family. And yet here they were, staring at him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Their presence made the town seem less like a ghost and more like a secret the world had failed to see. He knew the questions would come, and he had 100 of them spinning in his head. But one rose above the rest. How had a family survived all these years in a place the maps had erased? He could see the signs the garden tended in patches. A makeshift windmill that still creaked and spun, smoke curling from a chimney despite the town's abandonment. This was more than survival. It was defiance. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and dust, the only sound, the distant cry of a lone coyote. Then Marlene stepped aside, almost reluctantly, and gestured for him to come in. Silas hesitated at the threshold, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. Every step into the hotel, every glance at the faded wallpaper and worn floorboards, made him feel the life of Dry Gulch beneath his boots. "You're not supposed to be here," she said again, softer this time. "This town, it's not ready for outsiders." And yet Silas replied, "I am." Her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a measure of respect or perhaps a warning. There was more to Dry Gulch than its dust-covered streets and forgotten buildings. He could feel it in the way the family moved, in the way the shadows seemed to cling to corners as if alive. Something had kept them here, something they weren't ready to share. A sudden crash from the back of the hotel made them all jump. The youngest boy scrambled toward the sound, and Silas instinctively followed. What he found in the dim light of the storage room made him pause. It was not what he expected. Not rats, not broken furniture, not the ghosts of the past. Something else, something alive. Something that had been waiting for him to arrive. He looked at Marlene, whose expression was unreadable. She simply said, "I warned you. Some things in Dry Gulch are not for the world outside." And in that moment, Silas understood that buying a ghost town for $100 had not been a bargain at all. It had been a summons. Outside, the wind howled across the empty streets of Dry Gulch, and the sun disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the town bathed in the pale light of dusk. Silas, Boone, rancher, and wanderer, had come looking for opportunity and forgotten history. What he found instead was a family clinging to a secret and a town that was far from dead. As night fell, the shadows grew longer. The wind carried whispers of the past, mingling with the present, and Silas felt a shiver he couldn't shake. He knew he had a choice: walk away and leave the town to its silence, or stay and uncover the truth hidden behind the boarded windows and wary eyes. And deep down, he knew one thing. Dry Gulch was not going to let him leave without answering questions he had not yet thought to ask. Silas Boone stayed by the hotel doorway, the wooden floorboards creaking under his boots as he tried to steady his nerves. The shadows seemed deeper now, twisting with the dim light of the single lantern Marlene Cade carried.
Ow.
The family had retreated into the main room, leaving him with a strange mix of curiosity and unease. He could hear whispers, quiet enough that he couldn't make out the words, but clear enough that they hinted at secrets they were determined to guard. He glanced around the hotel lobby. The wallpaper was faded, curling at the edges like brittle leaves. And the furniture was worn, yet carefully arranged, as if someone still lived with care. There were small touches of lifespan, old quilt folded over a chair, a basket of apples on a side table, a broom leaning against the wall. Each item told a story, a quiet defiance against the town's supposed abandonment. Silas ran a hand along the counter of the hotel's front desk. Dust coated the wood, but beneath it, the surface was polished smooth, a testament to someone's persistent attention. "I have to ask," he said slowly, turning back to Marlene, who was standing near the fireplace, her eyes sharp but wary. "How long have you been here?" Marlene's lips pressed into a thin line, and she didn't answer immediately. Finally she spoke, her voice low, steady. "Longer than most would believe. Longer than Dry Gulch has even been on any map." Silas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He had expected a few years, maybe a decade at most. "Not this. Your family. You've survived all this time alone?" he asked, gesturing toward the other figure still lingering in the shadows. She gave a small, almost bitter laugh. "Oh, survived is one word for it. Thrived is another, though not in the way you might think. Dry Gulch has its ways of testing a person. You either adapt or you vanish." The words hung heavy in the air. Silas felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He had wandered through plenty of ghost towns, places left behind by men chasing gold, cattle, or opportunity. None had a heartbeat like this one. None had a family standing defiantly in its midst, refusing to fade into dust. A movement in the corner caught his attention. The broad-shouldered man, whose presence had been silent but commanding, stepped forward. His name was Dalton Creel, and his eyes held a hard, unreadable edge. Silas could tell immediately that Dalton had been a protector, someone who had taken it upon himself to guard this town and its people from whatever dangers it might have once held. "You're not the first outsider to come sniffing around," Dalton said, his voice calm but laced with warning. "And you probably won't be the last. But you don't belong here, not yet." Silas studied him carefully. He could see the truth in the man's posture. Years of vigilance, the kind of discipline that comes when every day is a fight to keep something alive. "I don't want to cause trouble," Silas replied. "I just thought, maybe there's opportunity here, something to build, something to restore." Marlene's gaze didn't soften. "Opportunity can be dangerous," she said. "Dry Gulch has a way of keeping people from leaving the way they planned. You might think you're walking into a simple purchase, but sometimes towns like this have memories, and memories are stubborn." Silas nodded slowly, sensing there was more beneath her words than the surface warning. He had learned long ago that when people spoke like this, they weren't just talking about the past, they were talking about survival, about the hidden forces that shaped every day. The young girl, her name revealed as Lyra Cade, stepped closer to the fireplace, her fierce eyes never leaving Silas. She was small but quick, with a presence that made him feel both challenged and welcomed at the same time. "Don't let him think it's easy," Marlene said, nodding toward Lyra. "Dry Gulch isn't forgiving to anyone who underestimates it." Silas smiled faintly. "I wouldn't dream of it." The youngest boy, Yara Creel, peeked from behind the doorway, his curiosity barely masked by caution. Silas noticed the way he carried himself, as if he had learned to observe first and act second. Reminded Silas of himself at that age, alert, careful, always reading the land for danger before moving. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the crackle of the fireplace. The air seemed heavier now, carrying the scent of old wood and dust, but also something harder to identify, something like history that refused to be ignored. Silas felt it pressing at the edges of his thoughts, a mystery he couldn't yet name. Finally, Dalton spoke again. "There's more to this place than you know. You've bought Dry Gulch for $100, but you haven't bought its story, and its story isn't finished." The words made Silas's pulse quicken. He had come here expecting a ghost town, maybe a challenge or two, but not a story that demanded to be uncovered. He felt the weight of it, the way a man might feel the edge of a cliff under his boots, knowing he could either step back or fall forward into the unknown. "Tell me about it," Silas said, his voice steady despite the unease curling in his chest. Marlene shook her head. "Not yet. You need to understand something first. Dry Gulch hasn't just been abandoned by the world, it's been protected by those who refuse to leave. Every building, every street, every shadow here has been shaped by us, by our choices. You might think you can step in and take it over, but that's not how it works." Silas's mind raced. It expected work, dust, maybe a fight with the wind or wild animals. He had not expected a living family with a history intertwined so tightly with the land itself. He could see the way they moved, silent but deliberate, their eyes sharp and calculating. This was survival, yes, but it was also something else, something older. Something that made a man feel the pull of the past and the weight of secrets he could not yet understand. "Then show me," he said finally, with quiet determination. "Let me see what you've kept hidden." Marlene's gaze held him for a long time. She studied his face, weighing his intentions. Then she gestured toward the back of the hotel. "If you follow, you might learn. But remember, what you see here doesn't leave with you. Dry Gulch keeps its own counsel, and it doesn't forgive mistakes." Silas swallowed hard, feeling the tension tighten in his chest. He had crossed the threshold into more than a town. He had entered a story that had been living and breathing long before he arrived, a story that refused to fade despite the world moving on. Every step he took toward the back of the hotel carried him deeper into a world he had only glimpsed in fragments. The back corridor was narrow and dark, the wood warped with age, yet carefully maintained. It smelled faintly of smoke, herbs, and something earthy, something that spoke of life persevering against all odds. Pictures hung crookedly on the walls, faded portraits of people Silas didn't know. Their faces serious, their eyes staring straight ahead as if aware he was coming. "This is our history," Dalton said, his voice low, echoing slightly in the corridor. "And if you want to be part of this town, you'll need to respect it. There's more here than dust and broken wood. There's power, loyalty, and consequences." Silas nodded, feeling the pull of curiosity stronger than fear. He had always been a man who sought the untold stories, the hidden places, the quiet corners where life refused to bow to time. Dry Gulch was not just a purchase. It was a revelation, a challenge, and a warning all at once. As they reached the end of the hallway, a heavy wooden door stood before them. Marlene paused, her hand on the handle. "Beyond this," she said, her voice soft but firm, "is the reason we stayed. This is why Dry Gulch survived when all others fell away. Step carefully." Silas felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what awaited him behind that door, but he knew one thing with certainty. His life had changed the moment he bought this ghost town. Dry Gulch was no longer a story waiting to be told. It was a story waiting for him to uncover. The door creaked open, and a flicker of light spilled into the corridor, illuminating the determined faces of the family. Silas stepped forward, knowing that whatever lay beyond would demand courage, wits, and perhaps a willingness to confront truths that had been buried for decades. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the windows. Carrying whispers through the empty streets of Dry Gulch, Silas Boone, rancher, wanderer, and now intruder, took a deep breath. He had crossed the threshold into something far larger than a simple property purchase. The town had awakened, and it had chosen to reveal itself on its own terms. And as the door swung fully open, revealing the secrets hidden within, Silas knew he was no longer merely a buyer. He was a participant in a story that had been waiting for him all along, a story that would not be easily forgotten. Silas Boone stepped through the doorway into the room beyond, and the dim light revealed more than he had expected. The space was larger than it appeared from the hotel lobby, almost like a hidden hall carved from necessity. Along the walls, shelves held jars of preserved food, stacks of old books, and tools arranged with precise care. There was a faint smell of earth and smoke, a scent that reminded him of old ranch barns after a storm. Every detail spoke of a family who had made a deliberate choice to endure, to keep life alive in a town everyone else had abandoned. Marlene Cade moved to a large wooden table in the center, her hands brushing over its surface, as if testing its memory. "This," she said quietly, "is where we keep Dry Gulch itself alive. Every decision we've made, every choice we've taken, is recorded here. It's not just survival, it's preservation." Dalton Creel leaned against the wall, silent but watchful, his eyes scanning Silas with the same intensity he used when scouting the plains for trouble. "Preservation can be dangerous," he said, his voice low and steady. "If someone doesn't understand the town, they can destroy it by accident. Or worse, they can get destroyed themselves." Silas studied the table, noticing maps spread across it, notes scrawled in careful handwriting, and photographs of Dry Gulch in earlier days. It was a glimpse of a life that had persisted under the radar of the world, a life that had thrived where no one else thought possible. Yet the longer he looked, the more he realized that there were holes in the story that Marlene and her family clearly were choosing not to share yet. "Why keep it secret?" Silas asked. "If the town's still alive, why not let people know? Why not rebuild?" Marlene's eyes hardened. "'Cause Dry Gulch isn't ready for the world. The town is fragile, and not everyone survives what it demands. There are dangers here beyond dust, wind, and abandoned buildings. Outsiders come looking for easy profit or adventure, and most leave nothing but destruction behind." Silas nodded, sensing a tension beneath her words that went beyond caution. There was history here, yes, but also perhaps threat. Something in the way Dalton shifted, the way Lyra Cade kept her gaze on him, suggested they had faced more than the ordinary hardships of frontier life. The boy Yarick moved closer to the table, peering at a faded photograph of a man in a wide-brimmed hat and a woman holding a rifle. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice small but steady. "That," Dalton said quietly, "was the first of us who decided to stay when everyone else left. He made a choice no one else would, and it cost him everything." Silas felt a chill as he examined the photo. The man's eyes, though long gone, seemed alive in the image, staring directly at him as if warning him of the choices he would soon face. It was the first real indication that Dry Gulch's story was more than a tale of survival. It was a story of defiance, of courage, and of consequences that reached beyond what a newcomer could imagine. Lyra stepped forward, her small frame brimming with a strength that belied her years. "The town tests people," she said softly. "It's not just about staying alive. It's about proving you belong, and if you don't, it finds a way to make you leave." Silas studied her carefully. Her words carried the weight of experience, not childhood bravado. He could see the truth in her eyes, the same kind of truth Dalton and Marlene carried. They had not simply survived. They had endured trials meant to shape them, trials that a casual visitor would never understand. "Tests?" Silas asked. "What kind of tests?" Marlene exchanged a glance with Dalton, then said, "You'll see. Some things can't be explained, only experienced. Dry Gulch isn't forgiving. It doesn't care who you are, only what you can endure. And if you can't endure, it takes its own justice." Silas felt a tension coil in his chest. He had expected challenges, yes, maybe rough terrain, or the struggle to rebuild old structures. But this was different. This was a living town, and its definition of danger was unlike anything he had known. As the conversation continued, Silas began to understand that the conflict here was not just between the family and the outside world. It was also within the town itself. There were rules, codes, and unspoken traditions that governed every action. Marlene spoke of keeping the town's heart alive, of maintaining systems that outsiders would consider obsolete or unnecessary. Dalton emphasized vigilance, and Lyra hinted at hidden dangers lurking in the surrounding plains. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters and carrying the cries of distant coyotes. Silas felt it pressing against the walls of the hotel, like a reminder that Dry Gulch existed in isolation. He realized that the main conflict of this place was not only protecting the family from outsiders, but also protecting the town itself from the encroaching world. Every decision, every step forward, could tip the delicate balance they had fought so hard to maintain. That night, Silas tried to sleep in the guest room of the hotel. Moonlight spilled through the cracked windows, casting long shadows that moved like living things across the floor. He heard faint noises, scratches, whispers, and the occasional creak of a floorboard, but each sound was careful, deliberate, controlled. The town was alive in ways he had never anticipated, and he understood then that he had become part of something larger than himself. By morning, he had seen more. The family worked together with precision, tending small gardens, maintaining the buildings, and scouting the surrounding hills for signs of danger. Silas followed, trying to match their rhythm. But he quickly realized that being part of Dry Gulch required more than muscle and skill. It required understanding, patience, and an instinct for reading the land and its people. During breakfast, Marlene spoke quietly to him. "You've been outside the town long enough to see some of its edges, but not all of them. There are parts of Dry Gulch, even we barely touch. Places where the wind carries warnings and the ground keeps secrets. If you want to stay, you'll have to learn to respect those edges." Silas nodded. He could see the complexity of their lives now, the constant negotiation between survival and secrecy. Every member of the family had a role, a duty that went beyond simple daily chores. They were guardians of the town's legacy, and every act of care was a shield against forces he didn't yet understand. Dalton led him to one of the outlying buildings, a shed that looked like it had been abandoned decades ago. Inside were tools, maps, and small contraptions that appeared designed for defense as much as for work. "We can't let anyone walk in unprepared," Dalton said. "Dry Gulch has ways of defending itself. Some of them are visible, some are not. Outsiders usually only see what we let them see." Silas felt a surge of curiosity and caution. He had thought he could learn the town quickly, but now he realized he was only beginning to understand its layers. Each street, each building, each shadow had a story and a purpose, and he was expected to navigate all of it without disturbing the balance. The family spoke little of the past, but glimpses came through in stories of harsh winters, scarce food, and occasional skirmishes with trespassers or wandering outlaws. These stories hinted at dangers Silas could only imagine. Dry Gulch had survived because its people had been clever, patient, and unyielding. Their resilience was a shield, their secrets a sword. As evening fell, Silas stood outside, looking across the empty streets of the town. The sun dipped behind jagged mountains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like living fingers. He understood now that the main conflict of Dry Gulch was not only about survival, it was about control, secrecy, and the balance between the town and the outside world. And somewhere in the shadows, the unanswered questions lingered. Why had this family stayed when the rest had left? What forces had shaped the town's endurance? And what would Dry Gulch demand of Silas Boone if he chose to remain part of its story? The wind whispered through the abandoned streets, carrying with it a warning and a challenge. Silas tightened his coat and glanced back toward the hotel, where the family waited. He had crossed the threshold into a place alive with history, danger, and secrets. And he knew one truth with certainty. Dry Gulch would not yield its mysteries easily. The night deepened and the town seemed to breathe around him. Every shadow, every distant sound was a reminder that he was no longer just an observer. He was part of the story now. And the story was far from finished. The wind had shifted that evening. Carrying a cold edge across the streets of Dry Gulch, shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting around the broken windows and cracked boards, as though the town itself were watching, waiting. Dadas. Boone stood near the hotel steps, feeling the pull of anticipation tighten his chest. Something was coming. He didn't know what, only that the air had changed, and the subtle tension he had felt since arriving had sharpened into a tangible edge. Inside, Marlene Cade moved with quiet precision, preparing the family for the night ahead. Dalton Creel checked locks, inspected the windows, and tapped on the walls as if listening to hidden whispers. Lyra and Yarek worked together, carrying small lanterns and stacking firewood to ensure the family could move safely if the town demanded it. Each action was deliberate, rehearsed over years, and Silas watched with growing awe. This was more than survival. It was vigilance in its purest form, a careful orchestration of life against the unknown. Marlene finally spoke, her voice low but steady. The town is restless tonight. I can feel it. Something is stirred beyond the ridges. It's been quiet for years, but the wind carries a warning now. Stay close, Silas. You're not just a visitor anymore. You're a part of this. Silas swallowed hard, gripping the brim of his hat. The idea of being fully immersed in Dry Gulch's secret life was thrilling, yet terrifying. He had felt its pull since the first moment he stepped onto the dusty streets, and now that pull was stronger, almost like a current beneath his feet, ready to sweep him into its story. The family gathered near the hotel's main room, the lantern light casting flickering patterns across their faces. Dalton's gaze was sharp, calculating the possibilities of whatever they might face. Marlene's expression was firm yet wary, and Lyra's small frame radiated fierce readiness. Yarek's wide eyes betrayed both excitement and fear. Silas felt an unexpected kinship with them, understanding that in moments like this, courage was a shared responsibility. Then it began a faint noise at the edge of town, almost like a drumbeat on dry earth. Silas tensed, listening. The sound grew, irregular at first, then steady, deliberate. A shadow moved across the ridge, disappearing into the folds of the land, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Dalton's hand rested on his rifle, his muscles coiled like a spring. Something's coming, Dalton muttered, something that hasn't been near Dry Gulch for decades. Silas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. He had expected mysteries, perhaps tests, maybe threats from outsiders or wild animals, but this was different. The tension in the air carried a promise of revelation, danger, and the unknown. The entire town seemed to hold its breath with them, waiting for what would arrive. Marlene moved silently to the window, peering out at the ridge. "It's not an outsider, not exactly," she said, her voice tight with warning. "It's been drawn here. Dry Gulch has its own way of calling those who should be tested. And whoever or whatever is out there, it will not leave until it has its answers." Lyra and Yarek flinched but didn't move from their positions near the fire. Silas noticed the way their shoulders squared, the way their eyes gleamed in the lantern light. They had faced the town's tests before, he realized, and whatever was approaching was something that could push even the family to their limits. Suddenly a harsh wind swept through the town, rattling shutters and carrying a faint, almost musical hum that seemed to echo from the hills themselves. Silas shivered. It was beautiful in a haunting way, but dangerous too. Had no idea what it meant, only that it heralded the beginning of something that could change everything. Dalton gestured for them to move deeper into the hotel, toward the hidden hall where Dry Gulch's secrets were stored. "If it wants to challenge us," he said, "we need to be ready where the town is strongest. That's where it will come first." They moved as one, silent but precise, every step measured. The floorboards creaked underfoot, yet there was no mistaking the determination in their movements. Silas followed closely, trying to match their rhythm, feeling the tension rise with each step deeper into the heart of the town. Marlene paused near a heavy wooden door at the back of the hall, her hand hovering over the handle. "Beyond this," she said, "is where the test begins. We've prepared for years, but tonight, it may be more than any of us have faced before. Remember, Silas, you belong here now, but you must be ready for what comes." Silas nodded, his pulse quickening. He had crossed thresholds before, faced challenges on open plains and in dangerous towns, but nothing like this. This was Dry Gulch, alive and watching, demanding courage from those who dared to stay. The door swung open, revealing a hidden courtyard illuminated by moonlight. The shadows of the town stretched long, blending with the darkness of the surrounding plains. Silas could feel it, the presence, the unseen eyes, the pulse of something ancient and watchful. The family moved to their positions, forming a circle of readiness. And Silas realized this was not just a test of strength, but of trust, unity, and resolve. Then movement appeared at the edge of the courtyard, low and deliberate. Silas strained his eyes, but the darkness swallowed it almost immediately. A figure, or perhaps more than one, merged from the shadows, indistinct yet unmistakable. The air vibrated with tension, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the silent night. Dalton tightened his grip on the rifle, Marlene drew a long, narrow knife, and Lyra positioned herself near the side entrance, her small frame ready to strike. Silas felt his hands sweat, yet he did not step back. He had been drawn into this story, and now he had to face it fully. The figure moved closer, and Silas realized it was not hostile in the ordinary sense. There was intelligence in its movements, a purpose beyond simple attack or trespass. The town seemed to respond to its presence, the shadows deepening and stretching as though alive. The family's tension mirrored his own. This was the moment Dry Gulch had prepared them for. Marlene spoke softly, almost to herself. "It's testing us, testing everything we've built." The figure paused at the center of the courtyard, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Silence pressed against them, heavy and waiting. Then, without warning, a low sound, part growl, part whisper, rose from the darkness. Yarick flinched but remained close to Dalton. Lyra's eyes narrowed, and Silas could feel his pulse quicken. This was not an ordinary threat. It was a challenge to their courage, their vigilance, and their ability to trust the town and each other. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of earth and fire, and for a moment Silas felt the town itself lean toward the edge of revelation. Every building, every street, every shadow seemed to hum with anticipation. Dry Gulch was alive in ways he could not yet fully understand, and the moment of truth was nearly upon them. The figure advanced slowly, deliberately, and Silas noticed something in its shape that made him pause. It was not human, not entirely, yet it carried an unmistakable intelligence. The air thickened, and the family's readiness sharpened into a tense, silent discipline. Every muscle in Silas's body was alert, every nerve on edge. Then Marlene whispered, "Hold." It decides when to strike, when to reveal, when to judge. Patience, steadiness. The town rewards those who understand it. Silas held his breath. It never felt so connected to a place, so aware of every subtle movement, every flicker of light and shadow. Dry Gulch had become a living test, a trial that would not end until the night itself passed judgment on those within it. The figure stopped at the edge of the lantern light, and Silas caught the glint of something strange like eyes reflecting more than moonlight. Eyes that seemed to pierce through him, assessing every intention. The town's pulse quickened. Every heartbeat, every whisper of wind, every creak of the board seemed to align in a tense symphony of suspense. Dalton's voice broke the silence, firm but quiet. "Whatever this is, we face it together. No one steps aside, no one falters." Silas nodded, feeling a surge of determination. He had been drawn into Dry Gulch's story, and now he would not turn away. The tension, the anticipation, the unknown was all part of the trial, the climax before revelation. The family's unity, the town's secrets, the strange figure in the courtyard, all were threads pulled taut, ready to snap or weave together into something that would change everything. The wind rose again, carrying whispers across the rooftops, and Silas understood. The climax of their story was near. Every choice, every action, every heartbeat mattered. Dry Gulch was alive, and it demanded courage, vigilance, and trust from all who dwelled within it. The figures shifted, the shadows stretched, and Silas felt the weight of the moment press down like the coming dawn. Whatever happened next would determine who belonged in Dry Gulch and who would be swept away by the secrets and trials the town had held for decades. The night held its breath, and Silas Boone, along with the Cade and Creel family, waited on the edge of revelation, poised between fear and triumph, between challenge and survival, ready for the moment that would test everything they had endured. The night stretched on, tense and heavy, but slowly the strange presence in the courtyard began to shift. Silas Boone felt it before he saw it, a change in the air, a pulse in the ground beneath his boots, subtle but unmistakable. The shadows receded slightly, and the figure at the edge of the lantern light seemed to settle, its movements deliberate yet calm. The fear that had gripped him eased just a fraction, replaced by a sense of understanding. Dry Gulch was not a town that punished recklessly. It tested those willing to respect it. Marlene Cade stepped forward, her hand still resting lightly on the table's edge, as if drawing strength from the room's history. "It's over," she whispered softly, though her eyes never left the figure. "For now, it accepts us." Dalton Creel exhaled, finally lowering his rifle. "That doesn't mean it's safe forever," he said, his voice steady but relieved. "Dry Gulch doesn't forgive carelessness, but tonight, we proved ourselves." Silas watched as the figure dissolved into the shadows completely, leaving only the quiet hum of the town and the soft rustle of the wind. For the first time since he had arrived, he felt a sense of peace here, as though the land itself acknowledged his presence and granted him permission to belong. Lyra Cade, small but fierce, stepped closer to him and smiled. "You did it," she said, her voice bright with quiet triumph. "You stayed. You didn't turn away when it mattered." Yarick Creel, still wide-eyed, moved to stand beside his sister. "It was scary," he admitted, "but you didn't run. It counts for something." Silas nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fire in the fireplace. This was more than courage. It was connection, trust, and belonging. I'd come to Dry Gulch, looking for opportunity, for a forgotten town to rebuild. But what he had found was far richer: a family, a purpose, and a story that refused to die. Marlene finally allowed herself a faint smile. "You've passed the town's first true test," she said. "Dry Gulch has a way of weeding out those who are unprepared. It's accepted you. It doesn't mean you understand it yet, but it means you're a part of its story now." Silas felt the weight of her words. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more mysteries to uncover, but for the first time he felt a genuine sense of home and the quiet strength of the town and its people. The family led him back inside, and for the first time, the hotel felt alive in a new way. The old wood seemed less like it was groaning under decades of neglect, and more like it was stretching and breathing in relief. Lantern light flickered across the walls, casting warmth and shadow in a balance that felt deliberate, intentional. Silas realized that this place had a rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat that had been hidden beneath years of dust and silence. Over the next few days, Silas began to learn the town more intimately. He helped Lyra tend the garden patches, learned the patterns of the wind that Dalton watched so carefully, and spent long hours with Marlene understanding the history preserved in the hidden hall. Every corner of Dry Gulch carried lessons about resilience, patience, and respect for the land and the legacy of those who had chosen to stay. Silas discovered that the town's survival had depended not only on secrecy, but on ingenuity. Water collection systems hidden in the hills, food storage methods that allowed the family to thrive through harsh winters, and careful observation of the land to avoid dangers from both wildlife and wandering outlaws. It all painted a picture of quiet brilliance. Every member of the family contributed, and together they had created a fragile but enduring harmony. One morning, as the sun rose over the jagged ridges, Silas stood on the hotel's porch and looked across the streets of Dry Gulch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of sage and earth. He felt a deep connection to the land, a sense that he was now part of its heartbeat rather than an intruder. The streets were empty, yet alive with memory and resilience, and Silas understood that the town had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. Dalton approached, standing beside him with quiet authority. "The town has tested you," he said, his tone measured. "But it's also given you something rare, a chance to be part of a legacy. Most people come here and leave without ever understanding what they've stepped into. You've shown you can endure." Silas nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and awe. "I didn't know what I was looking for when I came," he admitted. "I thought I wanted a ranch, a town to rebuild. But this is more than that. It's life. It's family. It's history that refuses to die." Marlene joined them, placing a steadying hand on Silas's shoulder. "That's what Dry Gulch is," she said. "A place that survives because people care enough to keep it alive. It's not about wealth or comfort. It's about respect, courage, and the choices you make when no one is watching." Lyra ran up from the garden, her small hands holding a bundle of fresh herbs. "You belong here," she said simply, her voice confident. "The town knows it, and so do we." Yarrick followed, carrying a small wooden carving he had made. "It's for you," he said. "Reminder that you're part of Dry Gulch now." Silas took the carving carefully, noting the rough edges and careful craftsmanship. It was simple, yet it carried what a symbol of acceptance, trust, and a bond forged in quiet trials. He smiled, feeling a sense of belonging that was deeper than anything he had experienced in years. Over the next weeks, Silas worked alongside the family, restoring parts of the town carefully, always mindful of the lessons he had learned. The old saloon received repairs, the chapel's roof was reinforced, and small touches of life returned to Dry Gulch without disturbing its delicate balance. He learned to listen to the town in ways he had never imagined reading the wind, noting the subtle creaks of buildings and sensing the flow of the land itself. The family shared stories from their past, revealing hardships, victories, and moments of quiet courage. Silas learned how Dry Gulch had resisted time, outsiders, and even its own decay through the determination of those who stayed behind. He understood the weight of their legacy and the honor it was to join their ranks. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues over the plains, Silas stood with Marlene, Dalton, Lyra, and Yarrick on the porch of the hotel. The town lay quiet around them, alive but peaceful. For the first time, he felt the true depth of the connection he had formed, not just with the family, but with the land itself. Marlene spoke softly, her eyes on the horizon. "Dry Gulch has a future now, because people are here who understand it. You've helped make that possible." Dalton nodded, adding, "It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving, together. The town chose you, Boone, and now you choose it in return." Silas looked at the family, then at the streets of Dry Gulch, and felt a swell of gratitude and purpose. "I choose it," he said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to protect it, just like you have." Lyra smiled brightly, her small frame shaking with excitement. "Good," she said, "'cause Dry Gulch deserves people who care." Yarrick held up his carving again. "That means you're part of the family now, too." Silas felt a profound sense of belonging. He'd arrived seeking a bargain, a town to rebuild, but what he had found was far greater. He had found a living history, a family that refused to let the past die, and a purpose that gave everyday meaning. As night fell over the town, Dry Gulch glimmered under the starlit sky. The wind carried whispers of past struggles and future possibilities, blending them into a quiet harmony that only those who truly belonged could hear. Silas stood with the family, feeling the weight of the land, the history, and the unspoken bonds that had brought them together. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. The conflicts that had tested him, the mysteries that had challenged him, and the town that had judged him all had led him here, to a place where courage, loyalty, and heart were rewarded. And though the land would continue to hold secrets, the past would continue to whisper, and the challenges of the future would arrive. Silas Boone knew one truth clearly. Dry Gulch had chosen its people, and now its people, including him, would ensure that its story endured for generations to come. The night deepened, and the town settled into a quiet rhythm. The stars above shone bright and steady, reflecting the resilience and hope that pulsed through Dry Gulch. Silas looked around at the family, feeling a warmth he had never known. The trials had passed, the town had tested him, and the place that had once been a ghost now felt alive, filled with life, laughter, and purpose. Dry Gulch was no longer abandoned. Its story would continue, carried by those brave enough to stay, and Silas Boone was at the heart of it. The wind whispered through the streets, soft and approving, as if the town itself were sighing in relief. For the first time, Silas smiled without reservation. He was home.